Good morning from Los Angeles. John Kyo here, your friendly supply chain guy. And I'm here with Sharmeen Khan. Sharmeen is at Upsmart Global. And we had a discussion on LinkedIn with regard to farm to fork traceability. And this is a follow-up discussion. And Sharmeen has kindly and delightedly decided to come online and have a quick discussion on that. We're videoing this so that we may share it for others to listen in and also to continue the dialogue and the discussion. This is not about what's right or what's wrong. This is about advancing science and sharing knowledge and wisdom of what we're doing. And before I go over to Sharmeen, I do want to point out that in the next month, I have formed a team of about 20 different people, from solution providers to some of the top academics in the world and practitioners, to advance the notion of food traceability. So that will entail doing a deep and thorough literature review of all recent articles that are out there. Another stream will look at GFSI schemes and the traceability embedded in those. We'll also look at gray sources of materials, and we'll pull all of that together and probably produce about 3 or 4 different academic or publishable papers, plus market reports. Several government agencies are watching what we're doing and also providing encouragement. The intention of that effort is to update our collective wisdom and knowledge and wisdom on what this thing called food traceability is and how we can do it worldwide. So with that, let me go over to Sharmeen and formally welcome you, and thank you again for joining us, joining me. On the topic of farm to fork traceability. So what I say is that in most cases, it's actually not possible. The reason I say that is if we look at traceability, it's got 2 main functions. It's got one function to be able to trace back through the history, back to the source, and also to track forward. So if we look at US payments, by credit cards, it's only about 33 or 34%. Everything else is either cash or debit card. So when you get into retail, you have to be able to track forward, and you have to, you have to have the 3 P's of traceability. P1 is the product ID. So you have that with the GT and it gets scanned at point of sale. P2 is the party. So in supply chain standards, we call P2 the party. And the party in this case would be the consumer. And P3 is the forwarding premises ID. So if a consumer in the US purchases with cash or debit card, we don't have P2 and P3, hence the farm to fork stops at retail. So that's my argument on that. Now, when there is a QR code on a product, the consumer can do a fork to farm traceability scan, but that's not the same. So over to you for your opinion and your comments.
Right. So I think we have to kind of extend, when we talk about traceability, especially traceability in the United States, I think we have to extend the discussion beyond food to look for, I guess, inspiration or ideas, and to look for the possibility of what can be done. I do agree as far as the food industry in the US, we are just starting to scratch the surface, and I think it will take time. Much of that also has to do with us not only educating ourselves, but educating industry, and then educating mostly the consumer, because when the consumer is aware, then the consumer will ask. And when the consumer will ask, I think industry will deliver. We did definitely see a change in trend through the last 2 years. We all heard those discussions about the wet markets. Where did that fish come from? Where did COVID come from? Who really knows? I don't think we'll ever find out. And I don't think it's even relevant at this point in time as to the source of that illness. However, what it did was it made the consumer, one, very aware that there is a source of their product and maybe they should know where it came from. Because we still have stories of things coming from the cold freezers that has carried COVID from China to different ports, and then the product has had to be destroyed because there was COVID on it because it was chilled. So we know that's still an issue. The second thing I think the last 2 years has done is really speed up the adoption of online purchasing and the adoption of consumers become very comfortable with Instacart and Hubgrub, right? I think that's what Grubhub, that's what it's called. Grubhub and Uber Eats and all of that. So I do believe there is maybe a small percentage of people buying online or buying traceable food, but I think it is, people have realized how easy it is. We as Americans are lazy by nature. So I think we like the fact that things are developed or delivered to our home and that we can sit at our computer, order our groceries and all of that, and our food. I know, speaking for the younger generation, the Gen Xers and my children and the college students and stuff, they don't believe in driving anywhere. They want everything to come for them. So anyway, with that discussion, I think this is a conversation that will continue to grow, and I think it will continue to change. So I think what you said was that traceability was never intended for people to know somebody's name and their home address.
Yes.
I think that's no longer true. If you are on Google, if you are on Amazon Prime, if you are on any of these platforms, they know what you eat, where you eat, how you eat, why you eat, who eats in your home. I think they know way more in market intelligence than we give them credit for or we want to accept. So I don't think that discussion is true anymore. I think people know everything. What it comes to is us deciding what type of data we are willing to share and what type of data we want to control. Then you kind of have to think of, that's when I think of like other industries, like the pharmaceutical industry. You and I, we are on whatever medications, we go to the hospital because we're not well. They can easily look up our record. They can look up what medications we're on. They can look up the core products of that particular cocktail pill we're taking to the source and say, no, you might be allergic to this, or we can't prescribe something. So all of that data in those Epic systems that they use in majority of the medical facilities has all of our data, and it is tracing it to the minor detail to me as a person and to my biology, protecting me with HIPAA. And I think that is the core of what needs to happen. We need standardized rules on traceability that protects the consumer, that protects the industry, that also creates a check and balance so that industry is then on guard. Like, we will know if you're doing something wrong, because there's a lot that is done wrong that is covered because they're like, well, we don't want to share, it's proprietary. And that's fine, because if you have proper rules and proper standards, then you choose what type of data, where does the data go, who shares the data, and then there's checks and balances, and there's permission-based data sharing. So I think with all the laws that are going on with FTC, I know California, and I know you're in California, there's a lot of legislation going through on data sharing. And that, I think, is something that we have to do. What the medical industry has done, what many other industries have done, there's no reason the food industry can't do and standardize rules of data sharing that keeps me as a consumer protected. Like, I don't want people to know I've got 2 little children in the house, I'm by myself, or I eat this, or whatever. I can choose who I share that with if there are standards in place to protect me. And if there's standards in place to protect the proprietary McDonald's sauce for their burger because it's their secret sauce. And so I think it might not be happening now, but I think it will happen. And I don't think we can avoid it. And I don't think we should, because that will keep all of us in a better place. That's my 5 cents on the topic. I don't know if you agree with it or not. Maybe it's more than 5 cents. But
well, whether I agree or not is different. I like to analyze it, as an academic and as a practitioner being in this. So I want to get everyone's opinions out, and
right.
Your opinion is as valuable as everybody else's. And we hit this through, it has to be a multidisciplinary approach. We have to get the views from all of what I call the ologists. We need inputs from sociologists, from criminologists, from anthropologists, from sociologists. And when we get all of these ologists together, we can understand how people behave, We understand the fears that people have with giving away their information. We understand, what they want and what they don't want. So I think all of those things are important. But I'm happy you brought up the pharmaceutical industry, because the pharmaceutical industry has done a lot of things right. They still have a long way to go, and depending on the country you're in, they're either very competent or very incompetent. But generally speaking, it's a very highly regulated sector, and rightly so. We have to get the right medication at the right dosage at the right time to the right patient. They call them the 4 or 5 rights, and it needs to have that regulatory governance and oversight that mandates the full chain of custody right through to the patient. And so that's a great example for all the various reasons. And as you pointed out as well, the privacy of that data is very important. And the privacy of that data is actually what's holding us back from interoperability. So within the healthcare sector, and again, some countries and some states and provinces in Canada are really good at this. They can share information. I wrote an article last year on how blockchain can actually help with for medical tourism, for example. But we still have a long way to go in the pharmaceutical and medical world. I do recommend in conversations that we need more people from pharmaceuticals working in food, because with that mindset, and we need more of the technology platforms that are actually gearing up now for the new regulations in the US for pharma. DFCCA, or I always get that abbreviation wrong, but it's coming up next year.
Right.
And there's a lot of great people that really understand traceability and how it applies to a highly regulated sector like pharmaceuticals or even tobacco, where everything, even the machine, it's like in a casino where you have, the way government looks at a casino, every slot machine is a revenue generating unit. So the footprint around it is actually like a store. It's get registered like a store. And then you have the profit that's made in that, I think it's an average of 35%. Then they pay per that little unit. So in tobacco, every single machine that produces tobacco, that is also revenue generating unit, and they can trace it back to the physical line, the physical machine, and how they encode it. So very deep and thorough knowledge. And I've been deeply involved in some of these hardcore, highly regulated sectors for traceability.
Yeah.
But on the food side, while it would be a great ambition to get to something closer to a very strong regulation mandating full chain traceability. Do you think that the FDA or other governments around the world, based on your knowledge of them, do you think they would ever go down that path of requiring serialization for food and specificity right down to who bought the food?
I don't know about the specificity of who bought the food. I don't know if they would do that. However, I do think I think it's necessary, yes, only because, not only because, the reason I say that is because our supply chain is global. So 70 to 85% of the seafood we consume in the United States comes from Chile, Ecuador, Norway. Or it was farmed there, but then it was processed somewhere else, and then it was packaged somewhere else. I mean, if you look at the number of hands that touch a chicken nugget that you and I would purchase in our grocery store, it's gone through so many hands. I think it should be required stringently to know where the food comes from. We keep our children safe. We keep everything safe in so many ways. Why not with the most basic thing is what we put in our body? We should know what we're consuming. So yes, I don't know if the FDA ever will make it that tight of a requirement, but I really do think if we're speaking specifically of FSMA is already over 20 years old. It really has no muscle. It had no muscle. Frank Yanis has done amazing work by pushing it forward, by getting the discussion, the culture of food safety. all of that is still there, but I think the gloves do need to come off. I think they've really been really handling it very gently, and I'm sure there's a lot of lobbying and a lot of political leverage behind the soft handling of this. I think it needs to come off. I think we really need to keep our population safe. The only way you can do it is if it's a hardcore rules and saying, no, we need to know what you put in that chicken nugget.
Yeah.
What did Subway put in that tuna
Mhm.
salad that cannot be traced to any seafood by DNA? I
Mhm.
mean, I love Subway's tuna sandwich, but apparently it's not tuna. So what am I eating? Don't I have the right to know? Don't I want to know? I know it's proprietary, but at least I should have some control of what goes in my body. Maybe I have an allergy to some byproduct in there, and I should be able to know that so I can protect myself. So I don't know if the FDA will, but they really should, because we don't, and I think if we again change that discussion from culture of food safety to culture of data safety and bring that into one conversation, I think it's absolutely doable, because then the industry's protected and the consumer's protected, and we can all be safe at the same time. So I think the FDA should and can. Will they? I have no idea.
So I'll ask you a question in a moment about where the key issues lie in the technology deployment in supply chains. But before that, just a reminder for people listening in that the US does have some significant problems, as the CDC published themselves. 48 million Americans, which is what, 15% of the population, get sick every year from foodborne illnesses. 125,000 end up in hospital, and more than 3,000 die. Now, the economic cost of that to the US society is in the tens of billions, and that's quite significant. So the EU, I remember about 2 years ago, I looked at the EU numbers, and I think it was about 12 to 13% of the population. Canada, I think, was about 11 to 12%. So when I'm abroad and when I'm talking to governments around the world, and recently with the government of Jordan and very soon with the government of Vietnam, Vietnam has got 100 million people. So even if I use a conservative number in Vietnam and I say, you know what, let's say 10% of your people will get sick every year from foodborne illness, that's 10 million people. Now let's look at the real cost and what the WHO calls the economic burden on society, which is significant. So all of these things are very relevant. When you look at the different reasons for those foodborne illnesses, there are, the top 5, there's the top 10, and they can be traced back to different types of food. So when you're looking at traceability of food, it's not just where did it come from, but also what are the potential contaminants that could attach to that food, either in the ground, from the soil, from the water, or along the supply chain where vulnerabilities are. So I'm with you on that. We need to have very granular level details on who touched the product. And before I jump over to you on the question, I want to point out for anyone listening to this is that some work that was done at APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Collaboration. If anyone wants this report, I can share it with them. But I was advising at APEC at the time, and they looked at the supply chains, or I should say the service chains for food across APEC economies. And they looked at cherries and wine in Chile, in South America. And to bring wine to market, to bring one product to market, there were 70 different services needed. 70 different services. 20 of those services were done internally, 21 were semi-outsourced, and 29 were fully outsourced. So in thinking about our supply chains, and this is where I'm passionate about getting us towards, we currently think about our supply chains as linear. And we need to move away from that linear concept. It goes from A to B to C. And in fact, I argue quite often that regulations is actually holding us back. And Frank Yanis, previous to his FDA role, Frank and I were in agreement on this, that the regulations for one up, one down actually disincentivize industry to do something more, to invest more. This is why today we're talking more about blockchain, and I conceive blockchain as like a bicycle wheel. So you're moving away from that linear model to like a bicycle wheel where the hub is in the middle. Now, it doesn't have to be a blockchain, but conceptually a blockchain, the hub in the middle, and each of those spokes represents a service or a value add on that actual product that's brought into the hub and captured. And the reason for that is that when we actually have to do that product safety recall today, and by the way, I chaired the development of the first recall standards a decade ago in North America, and also at ISO. But today we still only think about tracing back the product. We don't think about tracing back to the services that were done. So of those, 21 services that were done or 29 in Chile for the wine, like were all of those companies certified? Were the resources competent? So the person who did the pest control, the agronomist, was there cross-contamination from any cutting tools that they had? Did they put too much pesticides or chemicals into the plants and so on and so forth? So there's a lot of things that we need to do. Where is the sample? Normally speaking, when you're doing food safety testing, you will have 3 samples. One stays in the laboratory, one goes to the buyer, and one goes to the seller, so that you can always trace them back. There is some bad stuff going on. There are fake certificates. One of the projects we have in Vietnam, I'm saying right now to the government of Vietnam, not to pick on them, but I'm saying for all of the rejections that you get from the EU, from Thailand, from the US, Australia, and whomever, you have to go back through that value chain and say, who certified that product? Somebody said this product is safe to ship from Vietnam. And then it gets to the EU, it gets to the US, and they reject it.
Right.
Was it a sampling error? Do we need to change the sampling? Was it a bad actor? Was it corruption? Was it bad testing? Was it a laboratory analyst that did the wrong test? Was it incomplete? And so on and so forth. So a lot of things going on. And I'm a big fan of getting people to think from a systems view, to include all of the services that are involved. So back over to you, you can comment on that, but also where do you think the biggest problems are that we need to address?
Yeah. Just going back to the South Asia part, we are working a great deal with the Greater Mekong Institute and the Asian Development Bank in Southeast Asia, because we have a lot of work that we do in Thailand. And then from there, we've kind of just connected and have and they're doing a big project that we're helping trace, which is livestock traceability across cross borders, because those borders are porous, and they never know who owned the cattle that was raised, say, in Cambodia, and then it crossed the river into Thailand, and then what disease did it carry, and who else was that cattle stored with, where were and so all that. So it's very interesting work. And yes, although whenever I'm over there, I find food to be extremely safe. Street food, you can eat street food anywhere in those part of the world, and it's usually safe. And I think one reason is it's very close to the source. It's not shipped from anywhere. You buy that pineapple, it actually grew right down maybe 30 miles or 30 kilometers if you're talking about that part. And so the food tends to be a bit safer, but I think but everything that you said, we're also doing some work with US aid in Pakistan, and they have products returned at port all the time for all the reasons that you said. The Vietnam is having problems because the certificates are whatever they are, and who knows who wrote them and where they went. And so we're working through those bumps with them over there. What is the biggest hurdle, I noted this in your other LinkedIn feed, is interoperability. I think that is the number one thing, because if you talk about the spokes on the wheel, if the spokes don't connect to the hub, the wheel doesn't work or doesn't spin, or however you want to say it. I think having an EDE that communicates, having a EPCIS system that connects who, what, when, where, if we can connect all of those, then I think even if it's not a wheel with 30 spokes, if it's a wheel with 5 spokes, let's start small, we will still be way ahead than what we are now. So I think systems that can talk instead of being in silos, and I know spoke with somebody at Purdue about a few months back, and we were talking about recalls. And I said, well, how do you do a recall? And he's like, well, you usually pick up the phone and call, although they won't say that publicly, but that, and they'll pick up the phone and call. And he says, we get everything in the kitchen sink comes back because nobody knows what's in the freezer, and they send us everything. And because they even internally don't have interoperability. So think if such a large corporation is struggling with recalls within, because they are so large probably, then imagine the whole country. Or really, I mean, I think thinking whole country is really limiting ourselves, because we really have to think globally. Because I buy strawberries in January at Costco, and they did not grow in the US. They grew in Ecuador or Chile or somewhere, and they went through the service people, like you said, the hands of the farmer, then the hearts of the processor, the shipper, the tracker, the packer, the port. You can go on.
Yep.
So yeah, interoperability, if we can communicate our export documents to our grower documents, to our shipper document, to the finally Costco agent who bought it and shipped it, and then I go into the Costco and I can take my phone and I can scan the code, and the code will say, John Joe grew it on this farm and it's organic and they don't have this pesticide that my child is allergic to. I think that's nirvana. Will we get there in the next 10 years? Highly unlikely, but maybe we can get somewhat close. I think it is doable. Technology is fabulous if we all agree to use it.
Exactly. So folks, there you go. There you have it. I'm delighted to have had Sharmeen Khan with me this morning. We will publish this video and you can listen to her passion and contact Sharmeen and the team at OpSmart to learn more about their solution set and how they're approaching it. And Sharmeen, I also extend an invitation to you. If you or your company wants to join this global effort to update our understanding on traceability, food traceability in particular, you're very welcome to join us and follow the updates online. The team will be forming in the May timeframe, and we'll do about 3 months of work to come up with something that we can share. It'll be all open source sharing. We will ask people to contribute who are as passionate as you are and as knowledgeable about the food system. I'm delighted that you brought up Costco, one of my favorite companies as well, and one of those companies that can actually claim to do farm to fork because of their loyalty programs very, very effectively.
Yeah, no, they're very good at what they do. I know where Craig Wilson, I believe, is the gentleman I spoke to. I think he's the head of their food safety, and I know I'm messing up his title. He's up there. He's one of the big guys, and it was very interesting. He asked me, how many products do you think does Costco have? And I said, oh God, I don't know, like a few million. He said, no, 5,000. I was like, how? He said, well, we limit that is our magic sauce per se. We limit what we put out there and we control what we put out there. And so we make sure everything is safe and our suppliers are safe and they follow. So I was very impressed. Yeah, Costco is absolutely doing it right. It's one of my favorite stores. It's, walk out spending more than I expect every time, but they are doing food safety. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And 5,000 products versus a typical large supermarket, the large format would have about 40,000 products across all the different sectors. Sharmeen, thank you again for joining me at short notice this morning to discuss this. It's great to hear your passion for traceability and for human health and safety and moving this all forward. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you and with many others. So thank you very much for that.